It's December and no snow, but the positive thing is that the cat may eat grass. Greetings from the forest. I want to talk about Donald Hoffman's theory. He argues that the reality is fundamentally consciousness, or reality is mental. He has this theory of conscious agents that underlie what he calls the physical reality. So that his thesis is that the physical reality, or what science models as electrons, quarks and fields and so on, it's not fundamental. It's some kind of an expression of these conscious agents that really are fundamental nature of reality. And he relies on this user interface idea that this cat here is a bit like an icon on the desktop of a computer. So the cat is not what it looks like here. It's something else. According to Hoffman, it's consciousness or some kind of mental entity, a collection of conscious agents or whatever. And it's just that evolution has created this kind of interface for us humans or other animals to interact with the reality, but evolution doesn't track truth. So this perception of reality does not necessarily correspond to what the reality actually is. Well, I think it's quite obvious that this everyday perception of reality doesn't directly correspond to the nature of reality out there, or it might correspond in some kind of structural sense. But in any case, the way I perceive this reality here, all the greenness, everything, it's generated by my mind, or you could say by my brain. In any case, the way I perceive the reality is something more than what the reality is in itself. The act of perception or observation can be considered as a causal interaction between this organism here, myself, and the reality. And the way that the reality appears to me is constituted by that interaction process. So the way I perceive the cat is constituted by the way that the cat is and by the way I am, and how these two interact. So it's quite obvious that the reality is not what it seems, or that the so-called external reality out there is not in itself what it appears to be, how it appears to me. Okay. And the idea, Hoffman's idea that evolution doesn't track truth, well, you can argue in this way, and I have no problem for that when the claim is that this like everyday perception of reality need not track the truth. Hoffman has arguments to this conclusion, why he thinks it's probable that this perception is actually illusory. Okay, nothing problematic in this idea that the reality is something different from what it seems in everyday perception. It's quite obvious in my opinion. But the problem with Hoffman's view, there are actually two problems. The first problem is that he denies scientific realism. He holds that science doesn't adequately describe the reality. According to him, even the way that physics portrays reality is an illusion. It's also part of the user interface. And this makes no sense at all, because if the user interface is conceptualized as the way evolution has created this perception of reality, this human perception, like when I see with my eyes, when I touch with my hands, when I smell with my nose, and so on, well, that can be considered as a user interface and illusory in a sense. But what about scientific descriptions of the reality, like for example quantum mechanics or theory of gravity or electromagnetism or thermodynamics and so on? Clearly this is a mathematical description. It's not based solely on the senses. It's very different from the way that I perceive the reality here as I walk. And actually, based on physics, we can say that this perception of reality is illusory, in the sense that the reality as described by physics is very different from this everyday perception of reality. Like everything is some kind of quantum fluctuation or quantum fields vibrating or whatever, and what we perceive as like concrete matter is actually mainly empty space, if it makes sense to speak of space at all. It's mainly like forces interacting. In any case, it's something very different from the way it looks like in everyday perception. So everyday perception from the perspective of physics is an illusion, but according to Hoffman, they are both equally illusory. That the picture of reality in the physical science is an illusion. It's a user interface. But this is like weird claim, because the evolution didn't create our physical theories, our mathematical abstractions. Evolution is to blame for our capacity for mathematical thinking and abstraction, but you cannot explain theory of relativity in physics by using evolutionary terms, in the same way that you can explain this perception of the cat using some kind of roughly evolutionary terms. So here is a problem. Why does Hoffman consider physics as illusory? That there is some okay, and this is not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem with Hoffman's idea is that it contradicts scientific realism. Scientific realism is the thesis that mature scientific theories somehow track the truth, that they somehow correspond to the way that the reality is. And I think the strongest argument to this conclusion is the so-called no miracles argument made by Hilary Putnam. So if our nuclear theories in nuclear physics, if they didn't somehow correspond to the way that the reality is, it would be a miracle that nuclear plants work. It would be a miracle that our theories predict observations with such accuracy. So if the whole physical science was just an illusion, The atoms would be illusory, the quantum fields would be illusory, all the physical, all the nuclear physical processes would be illusory. But clearly the energy produced by a nuclear plant is not illusory, it's real and concrete. You can do mechanical work with that energy. So if you deny this, you are like eventually led into a rabbit hole of denying the whole of reality, and that's not rational. We have rational grounds for believing in the truth of physics. We have lots and lots of evidence in Bayesian terms of like evidence for our scientific models of reality. And this is not to say that the physical theories wouldn't be abstractions. Physical theories are abstractions, and the physical theories don't exist without our minds. The physical theories exist in our minds. They are models of reality in our minds. But from the premise that the physical theory is in my mind or in my brain, it doesn't follow that it would be untrue. Because, well, you can have a map that is clearly distinct from the territory, and still the map can be like perfectly valid. It can correspond to the structure of the terrain, the real terrain. So this is the biggest problem, in my opinion, for Hoffman's theory. It denies the validity of science, and thus this is like a real major problem. And why does it do so? Why does he make this completely absurd claim that physics is illusory, part of some kind of a user interface? Well, he makes this claim because he wants to claim that the fundamental nature of reality is mental. I don't know why he endorses idealism with such strong motivation. I don't know why people have so strong motivations for their metaphysical theories. Maybe some kind of personal experiences, maybe some kind of spiritual experiences. That's possible. I personally think that we cannot really say anything about the metaphysical nature of reality. Like, is it mental or physical, and what is the difference between those two? And you know, I think metaphysics is basically just language games, and we shouldn't take them so seriously. But in any case, if you want to argue for idealism, let's take this as a premise. Let's suppose that you want to argue for idealism, like Hoffman does, and now he wants to deny that physics is real, that the physical is real, because he assumes that the physical is something non-mental. And why does he make this kind of assumption? There is no grounds for that whatsoever. In fact, we can argue that human consciousness is a brain process. There is lots of evidence for that, and brain processes are physical. And if consciousness is physical, then it follows that some physical processes are conscious. So it follows that the physical doesn't exclude the mental. That is, there are some physical processes which are also mental. So there is no sense in assuming that the physical somehow outrules mentality or excludes mentality. Let's see how the cat reacts with that water there. She likes water, actually. But yes, Hoffman thinks that he wants to believe that the fundamental nature of reality is mental, and he assumes that the physical cannot be mental. Thus, he infers that the fundamental nature of reality is not physical, so that the physical is an illusion. And thus he ends up in this theory of this, oh dear, now she goes there and I cannot really follow, this is a problem. Come here, do tänne. I'm sorry. Just a moment. I should always be prepared and not let her go into these very difficult places. But okay, I try to be more prepared now. She wants to go there, but I cannot let her because she gets stuck with the leash. Okay, so Donald Hoffman thinks that the physical reality is an illusion. All that the physics describes is illusory. It doesn't really exist. Atoms don't exist. Brains don't exist. Quantum fields don't exist. Matter doesn't exist. Energy, as described by physics, doesn't exist. All these are just illusions. So what does exist according to Hoffman? Well, it's these conscious agents that he claims that underlie the physical reality. So basically Hoffman infers this kind of dualism between the physical reality, or what appears to be the physical reality, and some kinds of conscious agents that underlie the whole of physical reality. And this is deeply, deeply problematic because it postulates entities based on only philosophical speculation. And it's dualistic because these conscious agents are something different from the physical entities that we observe, which are illusory. So these are the two main problems of Hoffman's account. The first problem is that it contradicts scientific realism and cannot explain why theories in physics. It's very difficult. Now I'm stuck with this bloody thing here. It's a bit. I need to stop soon. Sorry. I hope no one listens to these videos or watches. Okay, now, odota hetki. The cat doesn't understand that I try to do philosophy here. No vaan, mä yritän tehdä filosofiaa. So the two main problems of Hoffman's account. The first is that it fails to account why scientific theories are so successful in explaining observations and creating technical equipment like nuclear plants. If the whole physical theory is an illusion, how can it be possible that it's so good? It predicts the observations and it makes our living so much easier. And it seems that this is impossible unless the theories would somehow correspond to the reality. This is the first problem. The second problem is dualism. He postulates, solely based on philosophical argumentation, the existence of novel kinds of entities in the reality, these kinds of tiny conscious agents that underlie that something which we perceive as the physical. Okay, these are the problems. And why does he make this completely absurd theory? Well, because he wants to believe in idealism. He wants to believe that the mental is fundamental. But you know, you can have that thesis without making all these ridiculous claims, because you can simply argue that this something that we perceive as the physical, and that something that physics describes with all its equations, we can say that that something is mental. You don't need to postulate any kind of like new entities which are mental, and you don't need to make this weird dualism between the physical and the mental, or the illusory and the mental. So Hoffman's whole argument is based on a dualistic premise. That is the premise that the physical and mental are somehow distinct. And there is no ground for that. Read some Galen Strawson, for example, or lots of other philosophers. Well, we only perceive matter, and we only model it in physics. We don't really know what that something is out there which produces our observations, and that our observations are about, or that our scientific theories are about. That something could well be mental, or it might not be. If you want to believe that it's mental, go ahead and believe that it's all consciousness. I'm agnostic about all those kinds of metaphysical ideas, but if you really insist and you want to believe in cosmic consciousness and God and all this Vedanta kind of ideas, then go ahead, please do. But you don't need to postulate any kind of like novel reality beyond this perceivable reality, because like everything is one, you know. This reality that I perceive here now and which I call physical, this reality here, there is no reason why it couldn't be mental. The atom theory, it's based on observations that are about something. Something affects our measuring devices in physics. And we don't know what that something is. We can only observe it and we can only model it, but we don't know what it is like beyond our mental representations and mathematical models of it. We can believe that it's mental if we want to believe so. If we want to argue in that way, we don't need to postulate some kind of like conscious agents that underlie the physical reality, or somehow they are distinct from the physical reality. Am I making myself clear now? Nova? Ymmärrätkö? The cat doesn't understand, apparently, but I hope someone else might understand. So that's the problem with Hoffman's theory. I think I need to write an article about this, because every time I just hear Hoffman's name, I get irritated. Because that's just like bad philosophy.